Save yourself some money next spring and improve your soil health naturally with Soil Biotics Soil Boost. This is a dry, raw humic product that is broadcast post-harvest. Soil Boost will work for you throughout the winter months to create a looser soil and improve water infiltration and retention. Soil Boost helps to balance soil pH levels and increase nutrient retention so fewer inputs are needed. Make sure to also ask about new SB Digester Organic 301. This is an organic crop residue digester that is a combination of organic nitrogen and microbials. SB Digester Organic 301 will help break down wet residue and return nutrients to the soil for your next crop. Call the office at 815-929-1752 or inquire at soilbiotics.com. The folks at Byron Seeds believe organic requires a different perspective, plan, and approach. Organic isn't simply a different type of product or even a different way of farming. It's a different way of thinking, planning, commitment. It's a different philosophy on how to feed the world. Many won't understand, but the people at Byron Seeds do. We're owned by organic dairy farmers. We not only have the product, but we plan, manage, and execute organic. We speak your language, we share your struggles, and we laud your successes. Organic isn't a way of doing business, it's a community. We learn from each other. We're in this together. We'd be glad to talk cropping plans, management systems, the road to profitability. We understand what you're trying to do. We're farmers just like you. Visit us at byronseeds.net or give us a call at 800-801-3596. And thanks to Byron Seeds.
You're listening to Rooted in Organic Podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, today we are sitting down with Mark Seeley. Mark Seeley is the founder of OnMark Certification. It was founded in 2016, and it's based in Elkhart, Indiana. And we want to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of what the certification and the transition to organic process is. So, Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And can you give us a little bit of a background on what got you to start your own certification company, so to speak?
Sure. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I used to be a contract inspector for the organic industry for 12 years. We actually, in the Midwest, I was based in Michigan and other states over time, but there wasn't a local certifier in Michigan and northern Indiana at the time, and so a lot of support from area farmers saying, we would rather have more of a local presence for certification, and that was some of the push for multiple years. But being a contract inspector in the industry and traveling around and whatnot, it was partially personal interest on being more close to home and having a base versus on the road all the time. And so that was, I guess, my personal side of why to do that. My background is actually in ag business and ag education. So I was before being an inspector, I was a high school ag teacher for 9 years as well. So a lot of that, educating farmers, but not consulting or advising per inspector auditing, requirements was kind of a little bit frustrating at times on just farmers understanding what the process is and being compliant. A lot of comments about we don't know what the rule means, so how can we be compliant is probably a common question with a lot of certification, rules and things. So we started OnMark with a core team of people that had veteran experience in the industry, hit the ground running, had some local support with farmers that wanted to, again, have a local certification company. So we started out mainly in the crop and dairy industry, focused on farmers. My background's also, I have farmed my whole life from southern Michigan and southern Iowa is where I was born. And so we have that farm-focused and farm background experience, and that was another thing with a lot of situations within the auditing world is lack of staff, lack of qualified inspectors. When I contacted my contract companies and told them that I was no longer being an inspector, they were happy. It was surprising, half of the responses were happy that we were going to kind of take over a region of the U.S. to be a certification company because they were struggling with having inspectors. And the other half of the reaction was they didn't want to lose me as an inspector. So it was kind of a good double-edged sword for that situation. So that's where we started at. And we're a growing company in the Midwest, and we, pun intended, we are growing organically by referrals and a lot of activities within conferences. So.
Mm-hmm. So how hard is the accreditation process? To be a USDA accredited certifying agency has to be a lot of hoops to jump through.
It's a pretty intense application process. There is, I call it a step up for what a farmer has to experience of becoming a certified operation. An accredited agency has similar paperwork, but more from an administrative and legal compliance, documentation control. We had to develop, I know it was hundreds of documents to basically state this is how we are going to verify compliance and process through the non-compliance protocols within the National Organic Program standard rules. And so the development of the documents that first year, even starting to think about it, was literally developing documents to make sure we would be compliant as an accredited certification agency. And so fortunately, having been in the industry and having a lot of people that came, started OnMark with me, had that background of experience. So we knew what documents should look like from past experiences. And so obviously that was a huge step up for us in the sense of having a leg up, I guess I should say, to know what we needed to have for an inspection report, know what we had to do for protocols. So it's a process flow business in the sense, from A to Z, compliance has to be verified all the way through. And so there is an accredited certification agencies are audited by the National Organic Program staff on a rotating, it's not an annual basis depending on kind of where that company is at, but there's a first year initial inspection by the National Organic Program for any accredited certification applicant. And then there's the next year, there's a 1 year, and then after that it goes 2.5 years and so on. So they do check up on all accredited certification agencies and have just recently, over the last couple of years, boosted a lot of National Organic Program staff in order to be able to do that. So.
Mm-hmm. Does OnMark also have like an education side to the business, or are you strictly just a certifier?
Right now, we don't have a designated division of education and like with the top program and other aspects of it. We're a young company. We focus on the accreditation components of it. Having my background, it's a very hard part for me to divide, and so I am personally not involved in any of the certification aspects of OnMark. I'm involved in the inspection and the customer service front end of the company, and so we do have some staff that are just dedicated customer service people. Have nothing to do with files, nothing to do with the compliance decisions, anything like that, even inspections. And so that is at OnMark, our customer service team is our educational people. Mm-hmm. So if someone calls into OnMark and says XYZ question, they have 80% of the time are able to explain what the rule is. We don't advise or consult even at that customer service level, but we will explain what the rule is, trying to achieve as far as verification or documentation, and we get quite a few people calling in about just how do I become organic certified, and that's where our staff at customer service take care of that. So,
mm-hmm. So what would be those? Say hypothetically, I'm a farmer and I have basically zero experience in the organic industry, but I'm interested in taking my 100 acres of crop ground.
Right. So we have. There's lots of different situations. That's the beauty of agriculture and being involved in this certification accreditation arena is depends on the day what kind of question comes in. It could be a large row crop farmer in the middle of Illinois. It could be a small, homestead operation that wants to do produce on 2 acres. And so our staff are well adapted to asking key questions. What is the size? What is your scope? What are you trying to achieve? When was the last date of your last input? And technically the definition is that for 3 years, a field has to transition to an organic status for 3 years since the last prohibited input. So we ask a lot of questions to any operator that calls in. It could be the field has been fallow for the last 7 years. Nothing's been applied. We have an affidavit from the previous owner or even the owner for a family, and that farm would have been eligible 4 years ago. We have people that call in and say, I just purchased a farm this week and we want to get it certified organic. We're an investment company or a farmer that has made a life choice and has moved out to the country. That situation, unfortunately, if we can't get an affidavit from the previous owner, their transition time starts the day they purchase the ground. So 3 years from now, that field would be organic eligible. So it's about the documentation. Are we able to verify all the activities of that field for 3 years and have it on file to determine when that field would be eligible for an organic harvest? So it's not that they can start farming organically after 3 years, it's that they have the ability to harvest an organic certified crop at year 3 plus 1 day. So we, that's kind of the questions we ask initially. And there's everything in between, tons of different scenarios. The reason we ask when was the last day you applied something is it could be that it might have been eligible even years before that, because that what they thought was a prohibited input might actually be an allowed input. But we work with a lot of people that are transitioning and calling in, and we encourage people to just contact a certifier, OnMark or others, where they actually can have a relationship on making sure if they're transitioning, starting this year, knowing what the allowed inputs are for even next year could be disastrous if they thought it was okay, but they didn't kind of check with it. So it's an interesting little component where technically a person transitioning doesn't have to have a relationship with an organic certifier during the transitional years. It's not part of the rules. And sometimes it's just people just didn't know they wanted to become organic certified until they were made aware, maybe at a conference or talking to an industry person, or the dairy industry, being eligible to get onto an organic milk, route. And so they didn't know they needed to keep, in contact with something in 3 years from now, because that is a pretty long time to kind of plan something out. But so there's just all those different variables.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the previous land use. What is that actually? It's the previous land use disclosure form or something. What is it called?
Yeah, we call it the PLUD. It's previous land use documentation. Okay. It's an affidavit. We actually have, it's a legal document that we actually, if someone says, prior landowner states what happened during the last X number of years, then sometimes that document will be acceptable field history for 2 years. If I bought the farm, this year, if I could get information about it for the 2 years prior, then that operator might be able to certify something this fall, depending on when that date of input, prohibited input is. Treated seeds, some sort of spray activity during the summer for like crop ground is kind of probably the two most normal prohibited input activities that would start the clock 3 years from that date. Mm-hmm. If operators don't know exactly when they applied it, because again, it might have been 2-3 years ago, we will use other forms of documentation to verify when that activity occurred. If it was, say, July, but they don't know the exact date, at OnMark we default to basically we start the clock August 1st. Mm-hmm. So we, give her, the next available date after July.
Because I actually had the farm that I rent, the neighbor farmed it for 30 years, and so I had no field history, and he basically said, well, I've just grazed and I haven't put any inputs on in 12 years.
Yeah.
So he signed that, and I was able to get the land certified pretty much right away.
Right. Yeah, and it's the documentation of inputs for the transition period. That's the main thing. Once an operator becomes organic certified, there are other rules that kind of take into effect. Once you're certified, you follow all the National Organic Program rules. But that transition period is basically documenting, is it an eligible field to be an organic certified operation? And unfortunately, there's other farmers that have taken over a farm even from maybe another organic farmer. There are price wars out there in the grain world where that operator refuses to provide any information on previous years. And that's unfortunate for the new tenant wanting to raise certified ground. And some situations we can't verify it, then we obviously can't, certify it. So there's some ways to talk to other certifiers, or whatnot if we have, ability to get information. But it is confidential information for every certified entity's file, and documents are not public information, I guess I should say.
So if I would buy a certified organic farm, but the person who had it certified would not sign a previous land use document, I got to transition 3 years.
Potentially, it could be if we are unable to verify, 3 years worth of activities to know that it was a certified field. There's been a couple situations where we've reached out to the other certifier, or, potentially it might be an OnMark certified operation. I guess we could, internally, gather documents, but the industry is a small enough industry that the certification bodies, OnMark included, we are obligated to share information across the board if requested. So other certifiers have contacted OnMark. We've contacted other certifiers about some information about a prior situation. Normally it's a non-compliance concern to do a traceability forward and back. But some situation like that, like at OnMark, we would do the best we could to try to find that information for that operator, because we obviously know the previous land operator manager was certified. We can verify that, but what gets sticky is that sometimes we don't know exactly what field and which location this, maybe you, Mike, that, wanted to get certified the next year. We would have to find that information out. And for the most part, the certification agencies will, help make that continue, because no one wants the land to go out of organic certification for 3 years if it's a situation like that. But
sure.
And then the other, probably the most common, is when like a land auction or whatnot, it might have been eligible this year. I've seen some land auctions that say, an organic eligible cropland in certain communities where that is, could add value to that price of land. But then the auction closes and whatnot, and we can't get a hold of the estate that formerly owned the land because it was stated as maybe being in transition. But that's a harder situation because no information versus a certified operation is a little bit different scenario.
Sure.
So what are some of the, we're talking kind of in, like, let's just say 100 acre, I'll make this real simple, 100 acre field, which I understand is pretty rare. Now, what are some of the complications that you've run into during that 3-year transition when it's a much bigger, and I'm talking a little bit from experience here, where, you've got, say, 1,000 acre farm, and 200 acres of that could be transitioned today. There's another patch that just got farmed conventionally this previous season, and you kind of got this patchwork of fields that are trying to be figured out. How do I do this in a whole operation? But what are some of the trip ups that farms have during that 3-year time period?
Yeah, it's a good question. So contamination and commingling, the prevention of those two words within any operation is a lens that an accredited certification agency uses. So you can certify one field out of hundreds of fields or tens of fields that an operation might have. It's not all or nothing. So there is going to be what we call split operations. So how to avoid that crop being commingled with the non-GMO crop or the conventional crops is part of the application process within an initial application to OnMark. And so we do a risk analysis of every file that comes in. Dedicated organic farm surrounded by woods. Obviously, we'd have a lower risk threshold than a split operation with hundreds and thousands of acres and 200 acres of organic. And so we look at that from multiple lenses at the initial review, the review of the file. It gets obviously marked as a medium to high risk situation. And then that transfers all the way through our whole system with the inspection, needing to verify how is their segregation being conducted, what sort of practices they do. We have some larger acre farms at OnMark that we certify where they've just flat out purchased different harvesting equipment and a different planter that is just dedicated organic for that, let's say 200 acres. And then their conventional equipment's on another, another barn at another location, so they totally segregate. The challenging ones are where they have the same equipment. And so there is a requirement to clean, purge, verify that that equipment was clean and suitable to be conducted and used for organic operations, and that's part of their record-keeping system that they have to document to us to verify. If it's unable to be verified, then that's obviously a major noncompliance and concern for the integrity of the organic industry, and so we definitely factor that into our risk assessment during the inspection, and then after the inspection, a report's written up on the observations made at the physical annual inspection, and then the certification decision department will take those all into account and potentially follow up with that operator on more information is needed or issue noncompliance as appropriate. And that's part what I call the legal side of OnMark, in the sense of we have to document everything. If it ever escalates to a major noncompliances, the National Organic Program has staff and gets involved with the certification agencies as required. And at some point, it could escalate up to proposed suspension levels, and then the National Organic Program takes that over and actually issues the major legal issues, at that level. But it's the certification agency's obligation, and obviously part of our reason for existing is that we have to have all that information tight and well organized and well documented to provide a legal support for any potential fraud or contamination concerns or something like that. But for the most part, guys that want to bring a farm into organic production realize this field was in hay, or this field, is eligible. There are some operations due to cash flows and different things. It is still a business. It's organic is a production food industry or feed industry business, where they actually make the determination we're going to start transitioning. And so those operators have a couple years to figure out how are they going to keep things separated. Other operations that feel they have a field, maybe they just purchased that farm and let's just make that the organic farm, are a little bit more of a quicker turnaround on how they have to figure out their system, because it is a system as far as how do they maintain that integrity part of it. So it's a pretty in-depth application, and we really have different sections within our organic system plan, which is the document. It's the working and living document of every certified entity is their organic system plan. And so that is what's verified on site, is based off of their process flows and their maps and how are they keeping segregation and buffers across the board for that operation. And so it's a proactive activity to do inspections in the sense of verifying things, but it's also really is on the operator's shoulders on how they're going to comply. We don't advise or consult on how they could comply. They have to demonstrate how they do comply.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got two questions there. When, let's say you've got that one field is certified and everything else beside it is in transition. So I don't need to have a buffer strip between those two, being that the land is in transition, correct?
So if it's the same operator, that operator is the adjoining land use owner, basically. So we don't consider that there would need to be a buffer between an organic and a transitioning field, because that transitioning field does not have any prohibited input activities happening. In the Midwest, there might be cornfields where there's no fence, it's been bulldozed, there's just corn, and other than the variety or the planting date, you might not even know where that field line is at. That is a situation where the operator would need a buffer, an adequate separation between organic and non-organic production. So the buffer, would apply. But yeah, transitioning field and an organic field, we have an adjoining land use statement by the owner or by the operator, which is the same person. So no.
Would the equipment still going from transitional harvesting to organic harvest, that would still need to be purged or cleaned because it is not a certified product yet?
It would, if it's mainly with the harvesting, it would need to still be purged out. A transition crop going right directly into, say, an organic crop, a combine rolling right back into the organic field would need to be purged before it could continue in the organic field. So we would have documentation of what happened to the equipment clean out. And some farmers do use their transition fields even as the initial clean out. If they have, say, conventional, transitional, and organic fields, they'll run through the transitional field after they've done all their conventionals. So there's some time management and equipment management strategies that a lot of farmers could do, where, do the organic first, everything's clean, combine's totally clean, let's run organic first, be done with that, and then I call it a one-way street. You could go into transitional or conventional straight away. But if it's the other direction, then there would have to be equipment cleaning done. Planters, other equipment that's used for transitional or organic, if the seed is allowed in a transitional field, we wouldn't necessarily need, to require a clean out. Obviously, if he's going to plant into an organic field, a hay field or corn or whatever. But it really is about the documentation of the inputs, what was in that piece of equipment before you went into your organic field. If it was something that needed to be cleaned out, great. Purge it, blow it out, run some things through it, like even balers and things. I mean, we don't necessarily require that it has to be a full car wash situation, but what happened to those first 3 bales of square bales that went through that machine before once it goes into that organic field, and that it's documented as basically a purge. So grain is a little bit more sensitive about the size of the equipment. A very small pull behind combine is going to have a little bit different volume of cleaning out than a large, large acre combine that would need, up to 10, 20, 30 bushel worth of, going through all those augers and stuff. So.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of gotten up to, got this hypothetical land to the 3-year transition point, and you talked a little bit about submitting an application. So, going a little bit more on what that system plan requires, because I know there's a lot of initial hesitation from farmers that, if I'm going to go organic, I got to do this giant document, I got to do all this additional paperwork. So if you can go into a little bit of that, and then also once I actually have filled that out and submitted my application, then what happens with inspections and everything after that?
Yeah, so the Organic System Plan application is a mirror of the National Organic Program Standards rules. There's various rules within the federal rules that we have implemented into the Organic System Plan to have a documented statement from the operator on how they are going to comply. For example, adequate buffers between organic and non-organic crops. So we have a section in there about, do they need buffers, where are they at? And that's part of the inspector's job, to go and verify all these stated areas of contamination prevention. So once the application is filled in, the review happens at OnMark. Sometimes there's additional follow-up needed. Some farmers leave things blank, and so we can't process a blank document, and so we do have some banter back and forth with our review team, with operators, and then once the initial review has been completed of that operator's organic system plan, there is an annual, or for a first-time application, it would be an initial inspection. So that's issued. We have regional inspectors around the United States, and that is the inspector's job, is to verify what's on paper is what is being observed. So it is an on-site inspection. Let's physically go look at storage, equipment, fields. There is National Organic Program rules that 5% of inspections have to have a sample event, and also 5% of OnMark certified entities have to have an unannounced event. That's not generally the case for an initial application where they're showing up at any time, but it could be. But that's just an ongoing process. So what was the second question?
Then, you've gone through that initial review, and then what happens now? You're certified on an annual basis.
Oh, right, sure. So once the inspections report's done, the certification decision team will review all that. Potentially, there are operations that could be issued non-compliances, and some non-compliances are immediate responses needed. There's concerns from various escalated levels. Again, back to our risk. Some non-compliances are followed up by the next year, in the sense of an organic seed search needs to be conducted for future seed purchases, for example. That's just kind of one that happens. And so we actually will follow up with that on an annual basis, and part of the initial review the certification decision letter that's issued, once here's the certificate, no harvest can occur until no sales of an organic commodity, can move anywhere without an organic certificate accompanying it. There is a issued letter of certificate decision letter that explains the concerns for the year for the farmer or the operator, and they're well aware of it. There's multiple copies sent throughout the year to a grain guy or a livestock person about different updates that are required. So then after that first year, it's a big process. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork that's involved. Can't discount that. But once it's on file, the renewal process is a little bit more abbreviated. We have it on file. Is there any changes to your organic system plan that we have on file? Yes or no? There are various rules that the National Organic Program has came out, in recent years, that we've had to update certain organic system plan pages and documents that we send out again and say, this is some new rules. We need to have documentation on this. But for the most part, the second, third, and ongoing renewal years there's an annual inspection is always required. There's annual renewal and review of the documentation of an operation is required. So I kind of use the example of taxes in the sense of it's like a CPA. Like, the documents need to be reviewed. We need to verify it's compliant every year. And that's the process for accredited certification.
I want to step back, and for the 3-year transition, is there something that can be put on fields that requires more than 3 years of transition?
No.
Okay.
What happens 3 years and a month ago is not part of an accredited certifier's obligation to document. The potential of maybe let's say a toxic chemical being in that field, seeing and observing, that's part of the inspector's job, is to look at fields and suddenly see either things are growing really, really well in a certain area or really, really not well in a certain area. Every inspector has the authority per the affirmation and compliance agreement to be certified to take samples at any given time. It's not just the 5%. So if an inspector identifies a potential situation or risk issue, they could take a tissue sample, a soil sample, to turn into the lab and see if there's any findings that come from that. And then that would be a follow-up requirement. Obviously, if things come in what we call hot, positive, then we'd follow up about that situation. But something that happened 5 years ago, the National Organic Program rule is we need to document something that 3 years worth of history to verify the day that field is organic eligible.
Because I was looking at municipal waste that you see being hauled onto farms at insanely high rates, and PFAS is a whole different conversation.
Yep.
But I was under the impression that field would not be eligible for longer than 3 years. But
at this time, from discussion with our audit this year, we actually we need to verify what's happened for 3 years to verify compliance.
okay, perfect.
So let's go and throw a wrench in the gears a little bit and throw in adding livestock.
Right.
We've talked pretty simply about walking through a cropland transition.
Yep.
Now I've got whatever livestock you want to pick,
Sure.
And I want to get that certified too.
You bet. So it's slightly different rules within. It's not 3 years for livestock. Operators have to have organic certified land for an animal to be transitioned, or they call it converted, basically, to an organic status in the dairy industry for 12 months. That animal could graze transition year 3 crop ground and consume transition year 3 crops for an on-site operator. It can't be purchased from another farmer. It can't be transitional hay from somewhere else, but it's on-site. The National Organic rules state that it's one time, one operator, And that's the situation for a lot of farmers that want to transition their dairy herd to an organic status, is that 12-month converting. That animal is not organic meat slaughter eligible ever in its life, but it is eligible for milk production. There are other rules within the, let's say, non-dairy livestock, but still ruminants or swine, that have to do with an animal can be purchased as a breeder livestock breeding herd, and that animal has to be fed organic feed for the last third of their gestation, and then the progeny that were born from that female would then be an organic eligible baby. And that animal obviously would have to be fed organic its entire life. So there are some situations where breeder stock, let's say beef herd, are not organic eligible. They obviously aren't making milk to be sold, but they are able to be producing an organic beef calf based off of those rules. So there's some management of records that is pretty intense to verify that was occurring. There's an organic livestock application, organic livestock plan. It's very similar to the crop organic system plan. Another packet, how are you going to manage your animals? What inputs are you using? What sort of healthcare strategies and products are you also wanting to make sure is an approved and allowed supplement, healthcare products? The list goes on and on. It's definitely more intense than just raising corn, just because of the amount of daily things that could happen within, say, the dairy world. The poultry industry and the dairy world are probably the most common organic certified livestock out there in the United States right now.
So a beef cow fed organic the last third of gestation, has a calf. The calf can drink from mom.
Yep.
That milk's not certified, but that's okay for the calf, and the calf will be organic slaughter eligible because it was born on organic feed. Okay, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
And the beef cow is obviously still getting fed organic feed during the nursing period. The start of feeding an animal organic feed during the last third of the gestation is a documentation verification that we definitely consider medium risk, if not higher. But yeah, that calf is then, and a lot of operations that are doing that are not doing that on an ongoing year-to-year basis. It's a way to raise heifers that are organic, beef heifers that they're going to keep on farm, and we see that even within, the dairy industry. A lot of transitioned dairy cows that are not meat eligible over time in a typical dairy that's in the organic industry, that list of non-eligible slaughter animals goes down and down as the herd matures, and those older animals are cycled out, and all of the replacements are organic, certified 100% as far as even meat eligible. So we keep track of that. That's a part of the livestock organic system plan, is we have a livestock list of all animals, all identified, knowing exactly which ones are eligible or not, as part of obviously the slaughter eligibility. If an animal is moved off farm and sold, that's a traceability issue, tracing forward to even slaughter facilities and was this animal eligible for organic meat or not? And that's part of the industry, and that's definitely a part. We're heavy in the dairy industry as a certifier, where we work with other certifiers on that traceability. It's not been uncommon where we get contacted, or we contact another certifier about these animals moved off site, or a slaughter facility wants to verify that this is actually an accurate list and whatnot, and we work together on that.
So is the RFID tag coming for organic animals?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Because in Europe, it's there, and it does really, really help traceability. But I think that is a slippery slope. I don't know. I am clearly on the fence on that one, because I see the benefits, but I also, I don't know, maybe overreach or whatever you want to call it.
It would be a great way for the United States to identify organic animals movement. It's currently, certifiers have internal lists of animals within an operation that's certified by OnMark. there is not a national database. We work together to communicate movement of animals across, multiple certifiers. A farmer might decide he wants to sell some heifers to someone else that's certified with another certification agency. That list of OnMark animals goes with those animals to the other, the buyer, and then that list is incorporated into that, other certifiers' herd list management system. That's the current situation.
So that livestock inspection, like you said, it's a more intense daily interaction. So I'm assuming that the inspection is also a bit more intense for those farmers. And what are they expected to document, and what are you reviewing when you go on farm?
You bet. So for the crop inspection, it's the inputs, the activities, the field history, field activities of that year, the equipment, cleaning, contamination, various other components of natural resources and biodiversity verification. That's crops. And then obviously the disposition of where did the harvest go. So the harvest is stored on site, it's been sold, show us all those. It's a traceability exercise. It also happens in the livestock industry as well. And again, we're the poultry and the dairy industries is where OnMark certifies most livestock. And livestock, there's various rules in the ruminant arena that they must maintain at least a minimum of 120 days of grazing annually. Most operations that are sustainable farms and really want to utilize grazing to the best advantage, exceed that by 50, 60 days. 170, 180 days, in the Midwest. It's the operator's obligation to document that, and how does one farmer do it might be different than even within the same county. It might be different days because of what forages are available. Are they triple cropping, double cropping, just pasture like a beef herd that don't, enforce their nutrient needs for optimal milk production? And that's the fun and the challenging part of being an inspector, is to understand what that farmer is trying to do with their management strategies to also comply. They also have to, within that 120-day minimum rule, they also have to achieve 30% of their dry matter intake from pasture, which correlates basically to 365 days. 120 is roughly 30%. Again, most of our operations are in the 50 to 70% of their dry matter intake comes from pasture. I don't know many farmers that are in the organic industry that would want to clean up manure in the barns. They want those cows to be out in the field and get out in the pasture and enjoy walking back and forth to get milked. So we have at OnMark, all of our dairy inspectors either are retired dairymen or are currently milking themselves, and so we definitely are able to talk the real life situations of how an operator is managing it. And I really enjoy doing those sort of inspections myself personally, just because you always get to see this like personal field trip where how's he doing it versus what you saw yesterday might be 10 degrees difference, but they still work. And it's just this management strategy, soil types, availability of pastures versus lost some ground last year, so now I've had to change and do double cropping on a different field, so I have extra spring crops to graze before I put in Sudan, for example. But there's additional rules, and just for sake of time, that's an inspector's obligation to verify the records an operator keeps meet those those two are probably the big two rules for the dairy world, and the ratio is one of the things that we evaluate at the initial review level, is the ratio of acres to number of cows on site. That's probably the quickest snapshot when we look at a piece of paper of an applicant. Is this reasonable? Definitely triggers kind of our medium, low, and high risk, analysis. But again, there's very creative farmers out there that use pivot irrigation, and they have, the ability to create some forages that's a significant amount of tonnage per acre. But there's also operators out there that farm on sand, don't have any irrigation, and that reality of what is achievable for this operation is part of the inspector's expertise.
And that is one thing in my experience. The inspector makes a huge difference on how it goes for the farmer, because if there's the rules that are written on paper, and it's understood they need to be followed. However, interpreting them by a farmer can be, it's not their expertise. They're farmers. They're not, lawmakers.
Right. Well, we don't know that many farmers that have the time to do excellent record keeping because they're busy farming. And we understand that, but that's not we are not able to just take that into account. We still have to have the records to verify compliance. So an operator over time, the first year, it is deer in the headlights, I call it, where farmers just don't know what is going to happen at that first inspection. And so we do take time with our customer service team to talk through the scenario like we're talking about today. This is what is going to happen for the rest of the next 6 months of this process, or 3 months, or whatever time frame we determine is needed. To go through the inspection and through all the process. We try to communicate that with our operators. We do have all of our inspectors, we traditionally try to schedule a minimum of 2 weeks out, if not longer, depending on our routes and schedule of trying to fit all these inspection requirements in, regionally. And the inspectors are at OnMark definitely convey what we need to be able to verify on site. We're not prepping that operator to, get records around, but we are telling them this is going to be the questions the day I'm there. So that helps, I feel. That's one of my strategies as an inspector is say, I do need to see all your purchased feed versus the day you show up, I need to see all your purchased feed is a different reaction for most farmers. From my personal experience too, I could have had that, gathered and ready days ahead of time if I'd known you were going to look at it. So after the first year, it becomes smoother also with the inspection because we like to send the same inspectors back multiple years. So we build a relationship. It's still a very professional relationship of auditing an operator's records. But when you know what was asked last year and you have the same inspector the next year, it definitely, I think, is more efficient. But at the end of the day, we all should be doing the basics of the same request. But farmers after the second, third year, it's pretty turnkey after that. Because what honestly happens on the first or second year is non-compliance to a 5103 record keeping, not able to verify something. And that's where the process happens where the inspector is unable to verify it. It goes into the certification decision, side of things where they get issued a non-compliance and have to provide that information within a set time frame. That operator, if they're every inspection requires an exit interview, and those concerns would always be written down and communicated with the operator before the inspector leaves. I call it we're on the same page. When I leave, what the problem is, or we had no concerns or whatnot. And so that is left with the farmer, the operator. So that workload or that work order of stuff to better be getting that stuff around is known the day the inspector leaves.
Can you explain, because you mentioned the 30% for 120 days. Mm-hmm. I know we know what DMI or dry matter intake is, but can you explain what the 30% that is?
Yeah, so every animal has a dry matter demand or a feed requirement to be an animal. I mean, it's just what do we need to eat every day to be able to be healthy, happy, and full of energy? In the food industry, the meat industry or the livestock industry for milk, there is known charts and information out there that there is a average amount of pounds per animal that's required on a daily basis called a dry matter demand for feed intake to produce milk. There's different charts within the organic industry and that states if an animal is raising 40 pounds, or producing 40 pounds of milk on average, they need X number of pounds of feed a day. So that number is a known, and a lot of dairy operations have either mixed herds, breeds, or registered herds, or they're all Holsteins or they're Jerseys, is all the operator's responsibility to state what their demands are for their farm. We review that, and we have industry knowledge and expertise to know, is this reasonable? That number is then calculated how much feed is needed for the day on an annual basis. So it's an average number. There are at OnMark we do have various seasonal feeding rations that we have templates for that farmers can say, this is my spring ration, this is my summer ration when they're all on the pasture. We're not giving them, much supplements because the hayfield or the pasture is, lush and the cows they're just out there eating. And then in the fall, and then obviously we have a fourth, that actually is just a winter ration. So we actually base it off the winter ration on the sense of if you have no pasture, what is the total amount of feed you're giving those animals? So for a new applicant, that would be the starting point. Like if you have no pasture, what do you have to feed these animals in other feeds? And so from that, it's worksheets. We calculate, the operator calculates what their feed needs are throughout the season. Our reviewers and our inspectors then will review those, basically the ration sheets, to verify that how are they getting, if they say an animal needs 30 pounds of feed a day and they are only feeding 20 pounds of feed a day, then the difference is from the pasture. So that we call it backwards math in the industry, in the sense of what they are required to have versus what they're getting fed. Well, the difference of that is going to be obtained from the cow's mouth, getting the forage right out of the field. And operators have various ways of documenting that. Some larger operations use nutritionists and have TMRs or mixer, systems where they're showing, here's my log of the feed that we're doing. Other operators just say, I give them 8 pounds of grain every day. That's my feed I give, and the rest they're getting from the farm. Operators also are required to document their feeding activities. So it might, an inspector would review, you fed 2 bales a week, for example, for a smaller farm or something like that. That would factor into, obviously, the dry matter intake feeding needs. So the dry matter intake from pasture, again, is just the difference of what that animal needs is 100% for production of a level of milk production that's been established. And it falls into case for dry cows and heifers. There's different worksheets for those animals. So traditionally there's 3 to 4 animal groups within a dairy farm that would be separately evaluated on, are they getting that amount of dry matter from pasture.
Mm-hmm. And then on the 100% grass-fed operations, now that is different. But as far as the dry matter requirement is that 60%, correct?
Right. So
instead of 30, so it's double that, but the worksheet and everything just stays the same.
Yeah, we use the same format. Basically, they were saying instead of, and it also factors into how many days did they graze. At OnMark, we have an annual livestock summary. It's a 1-page summary of all of the activities of previous year. So that's a renewal process that an operator on year 2, when it's time to renew in January, they basically give us a full summary of what they did last year. How many days did they graze? How much feed did they purchase? How much feed did they raise on the farm? It's if you don't like math, you probably don't want to be a dairy inspector, because you do all of this giant algebra equations, and at the end of the day, on our worksheet at the very bottom, it says, was there deficient feed available, excess feed available? The majority of the time, there's 20, 30 ton of feed still available, and they end up, they're feeding that in January, February for the next year. But that's where our inspectors coming, even in the summer of that, of 2025 this year, we'll look at last year's total records, because in the middle of the summer, we do verify animals are out grazing, and it's a beautiful time of the year to go look at cows grazing. But we aren't there 120 plus days to verify all of that, and that's, again, the integrity of the industry. It's the operator's obligation to keep records that was the grazing activity. And anybody, the public, can actually whistleblow and contact any certifier at any time, or the National Organic Program directly, about any concerns about observations. And that has happened over the years, where there's some animals not outside for the last 3 weeks. I thought he was organic, kind of calls like that come in. And so we're obligated to follow up on those sort of things, or contact the operation or contact the certifier that operator is with, and communicate across the board.
I want to go two different directions. One would be another part of certification. One would be industry trends before we wrap up. Mm-hmm. I know you do some processing facility
Sure.
inspections. How does that differ from everything that we've been talking farm side.
Sure.
Now we're talking more business.
Processor and handlers.
Yep.
So there's four scopes. There's crops, livestock, handler, processor, and then wild harvest, which would be going onto native grounds, state grounds, and verifying it. OnMark is not accredited as a wild harvest. It's not honestly I don't know how many are actually certified in that scope, but it's not very much. The handler processor industry is basically anything that leaves a farm. The National Organic Program as a certification industry, basically, as we talked about, crop-wise, verifies 3 years before an organic crop can be harvested. From that point all the way through the entire retail, here's something on the shelf that the consumer is buying. Every step is verified. Once a product leaves an organic farm, production farm, doesn't matter if it's vegetables, row crops, milk, that has to be handled and certified by an accredited handler processor. So those applicants, traditionally, there's a quality control operation or person within that company that's in charge of it, very similar to the food safety audits that are required for human consumption processing. There's another organic system plan for handlers and processors. We use those two words kind of together. A handler for us would be more of like a broker, someone that's basically the middleman buying commodities and selling it to the end user, manufacturer, or whatnot. The processor obviously is someone that's taking that and developing a retail finished good. So that application is very similar, obviously different wording, and we don't ask them about their pastures, but they are asked about how do they prevent contamination and commingling and segregation and pest control, within a facility. A lot of those questions are reviewed with standard operating procedures at that level. Farmers don't generally have their own booklet of standard operating procedures on how to milk cows or raise corn. They have just records of what they've been doing. But at the handler processor level, that's a very industry common protocol, because there's a lot of people that are working within that facility that my perspective as an inspector is I go in with the lens of I'm a new hire. If I can not make a mistake and process this organic ingredient or handle it appropriately, then their standard operating procedures are fairly tight. If I don't understand it or I could make a mistake, then those are gaps in the control system of the quality program. So the in and out mass balance and trace back audits are done for every entity, including crops and livestock. But at the handler processor level, it's verifying an organic certificate of that commodity that was purchased, comes in. Where did it come from? Was it from a certified entity that was accredited to have, wheat for, we'll use that as a bakery kind of example, and verifying all inputs were allowed and approved inputs, their process of how they're manufacturing the bread, and then at the end of the day, where did that bread actually be sold and what labels were used in the sense of organic compliance for labeling rules that exist out there. And it's pretty straightforward, honestly, in the handler processor world, because again, there's already quality control and safe food safety kind of mentalities within that industry that I've been at inspections where they have basically categorized organics in the same category as an allergen. It's just this product we do not want to have in contact with anything else, and it works. It's funny to say that, but they consider it a highly monitored commodity because of extra documentation that's required.
Sure, that makes sense.
And like a slaughter facility would be also under the handler processor, same deal.
Yep. So where did the animals come from? Do we have an organic certificate? And identifying that they were organic slaughter eligible individual animals. And how did they keep those animals separate? They don't have to be necessarily in a separate cooler room, but they do need to be on a separate line and identified that animal is the organic animals. A lot of handler processors do use strategies, again, no different than a split operation in say a large grain operation, where they have management strategies that keep the organic animals processed, first of the day, and then after that it's the non-organic animals or something like that. I mean, it's just it can be however they are able to determine that they don't have commingling happening. It's not required, but it's kind of more of the management's opinions on what's the most efficient way for them to go through their day with organic and non-organic commodity.
Last question for you. Just industry trends. You've been in the industry for a long time, and now talk with your whole company talks with a lot of people that are both certified and interested in being certified. And the interested people is what I'm asking about here is, do you see any trends is the amount of calls going up, down? Is there a certain type of farm or processor that's more consistently calling these days? I'm just wondering, like, from a certification level, what trends have you seen?
I think because we're a younger company, our trend was pretty high the first 3 years because we definitely were marketing about OnMark, and developing clientele and things. The industry is growing between 3 to 5% a year. And so across the board, there are people wanting to become certified because of those numbers. Different industries, like the poultry industry is strong right now. The dairy industry is strong-ish in the sense of depends on which part of the country the organic farms are located. So some of it is regional interests. If you are fortunate to live in an area where there's a strong organic market, then those neighbors are definitely aware of maybe I should consider being organic. But there are at the grain level, at the just the crop level, it can be. I mean, there's certified operations in every state of the United States, but some of that has to do with trucking and different concerns. That's probably the trend I see is the regional growth is steady to up, but the isolated island folks out in the middle of nowhere, if they're just doing if they're doing grain or something, I mean, trucking and rail is still a way to get it to the end buyer, but some other fresh produce and whatnot, areas around major cities where the markets are available. Unfortunately, the rural areas, the isolated areas, make it challenging for anyone that's trying to do a niche market. But it's strong. We're growing double digits every year at OnMark, and some of that, about 60% of our growth is new clients. 40% is clients that might want to be switching from another certifier, or they're in the industry already. So that's kind of the barometer we're using.
Sure.
So if somebody were to be interested in transitioning land, how do they reach out to OnMark?
So our customer service line, it's 574-971-8479 is, and our OnMark website is just onmark.com. Can communicate. There's fill in a questionnaire. We're happy to discuss any specific questions or scenarios. We're happy to share an application with even transitioning people just to see again what it's going to be 2 years from now, and discuss that. Even the material list, utilize that, keep track of the field history. Even at year one of starting to transition, we're happy to give them basically the template of what it's going to be in 3 years from now. So we don't discourage questions. Sometimes at the certification level of an existing certified operation, we obviously cannot make decisions or consult of what they should do, but we will be happy to explain what the requirements are, what the rule states, and just kind of individual questions. Again, that's the fun part of the agriculture industry, is that there's so many variables. We're not just doing a set building plan of a house that we do 600 times and they're all the same. The blueprints are, in agriculture, there is no blueprint. It's do the best we can, and given their situations of their soil types and their animal genetics and management are probably the big three that I see as the most interesting variables across every farm. Is one farmer achieves X sort of production, a neighbor might achieve 20% less or more of that production because of their management and their attention to details and, strategies that they've implemented over the years. Organic matter, for example, cover cropping, things like that have a significant improvement, across the board for the long-term management. And it is an integrity industry. Farmers that are in certified organic operations, the vast majority of them are in it for non-financial reasons, but obviously the financial, benefits of having a specialty commodity that they're able to sell is, I won't discount that at all either. But they want their farms to be in better for their. I've had numerous farmers say, they want this farm to be good for their kids or good for their grandkids, and they want it. They're constantly trying to look for ways to improve it, so it's adding value to their, the land, which is really, a great part to be involved in.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down. This is really interesting. Brian and I have lived through the certification process, but to break it down like this was really interesting. So thank you very much.
Happy to be here. Thanks, guys.